Hi, this is Andrew Thayer. I'm doing a review of our last two Sunday school classes. Um, for those who would like to review the material once more before we continue our conversations about same-sex marriage, um, or for those who were not able to be at the formation and would like to join us for a conversation, these first two classes were a way to help guide and shape our continuing conversation in discernment. And so I will begin. The church is guided by the power of the Spirit. That seems evident. That seems obvious. But going back into the scriptures and finding out the areas and the narratives that we are told about the presence of the Spirit and how it is used, I think are very telling and informative of how the church might use the Spirit and rely on the Spirit for discernment. If you go to Numbers chapter 11, you have a wonderful description of Moses, who's been complaining because he's got too much work to do. And so God tells him, gather 70 elders of the people and come and bring them to the tent. And I'll take some of the Spirit that is on you, and I will put it on to them. Which he does, but only 68 of them show up. And Eldad and Medad stay back at the camp, and someone even runs into the tent as the Spirit has been displaced now among the elders. And they say, Eldad and Medad are prophesying in the camp. That is, the Spirit has fallen on them. They didn't come to the tent. Should we stop them? And Moses says something very telling. Would that all people had the Spirit poured out on them. Which, of course, is exactly what happens at Pentecost. As in the beginning of Acts, we have this lovely description of the tongues of fire and the Spirit descending through the people of the church in Pentecost, and they are able, even though they're speaking different languages, to understand one another. And that Spirit will play a huge part in the rest of the book of Acts. When in chapter 10, and most of my next comments will be about chapter 10 through 15 of Acts. In chapter 10, Peter, the same Peter that denied Jesus, followed Jesus around, he goes up to the roof. He's very hungry, and while they're making him a meal, he has a vision. And in this vision, this sheet is lowered down from heaven, and the sheet contains all the animals that he'd been told ever since he was a small Jewish boy that he is never to eat. These are not kosher foods. And he hears this voice, Peter, rise, rise and eat. And he says, not in your life. No way. That's not kosher. I know that's not kosher. I will not do it. And again the voice says, Peter, rise and eat. And again he says, no, I will never do that. And the third time, rise and eat. And Peter says, no, I will never do that. And God says on the third voice, what I have made clean, you shall not call profane. And just then, there is a knock on the door where the house of Cornelius, the centurion, has sent some messengers to fetch Peter and bring him to the house. They knock on the door immediately after that. And Peter goes with them. And he goes into the house of Cornelius. And what he witnesses there as he speaks about Jesus and his life and his teaching is that the Spirit of God descends on them also. And so he baptizes them. Now, this caused a great deal of controversy, as they say, in the early church. Because, of course, for a Jewish man, even one following Jesus, to touch a Gentile or to cross the threshold of a Gentile would make you ritually impure, much less baptizing a centurion of all people into this first century group of Jewish people following Jesus. And so they call Peter out to Jerusalem to say, defend this action for yourself. How in the world did you think that was okay, that you could just go and baptize this unclean, impure Cornelius and his family, this centurion, this Roman? And so Peter stands before the Jerusalem Council, and it's a very serious question. How does the Jerusalem Council, how does the church, this early church, discern who is in and who is not in this nascent church? And so Peter's got to stand up and defend himself. And I think what he does is very telling for how the church discerns. Peter could well have said, remember when Jesus gave me the keys to the kingdom and he called me the rock on which the church will be built. You know, I'm numero uno. I'm Jesus, top guy. So, back off. I did what I did because I'm the leader. In other words, he would have appealed to his own authority to make that decision. And Peter doesn't do that. Nor does Peter go back through the scriptures and say, well, it says here, and it says here, and it says here, and it says here. In other words, he could have appealed to the authority of Scripture, which, of course, then would have been Hebrew Scriptures. What he says is, who is I to keep baptism from the house of Cornelius, on whom the Spirit of God descended? And that was evident. So it seems that when the Spirit of God is present, that it is a sign for our discernment, and it's going to be these fruits of the Spirit, the Spirit of God, that will help our decision as well. Of course, in Galatians 5, you got a wonderful list, although it's not exhaustive, I don't believe, of what Paul thinks are the fruits of the Spirit, which include love and joy and patience and kindness and generosity and faithfulness and self-control and gentleness. So when those things are evident, they are fruits of the Spirit of God. And then we've got another lovely phrase in Matthew where Jesus says, you cannot get good fruit from a bad tree. Neither can you get bad fruit from a good tree. Only a good tree can provide good fruit. And there's that sense of fruitfulness again, that if the fruits are good, if they're the fruits of the Spirit, then the tree from whence they came is also good. That is a very quick recapitulation of what we talked about in our first class. In our second class, I talked a little bit about how the church deals with controversy. And of course, I think one of the best examples of how the church deals with controversy, it's hard to get that out of my, that pronunciation out of my vocabulary, is best evidenced in the Jerusalem Council. When they met, they came up with, and of course the question is, should we or should we not allow Gentile people to come into this Jewish movement? And there were those that said, yes, we should, but they have to follow the law in the same way that we have always followed the law. The 10 Commandments of Moses and the 613 commandments about kosher eating and about how to live life. And there was another faction of this early church that said, it seems good to us that the Gentiles are not called to be Jewish, and to be circumcised, and to follow the law. And so what the Jerusalem Council does is they meet together and they discuss it, and they come up with a plan, if you will, a four-point plan that if you want to be a follower of Jesus and part of this early movement, it seems good to us and to the Spirit that you refrain from 4 things. 3 of them have to do with food. Do not eat what's been offered to idols. Do not eat what's been strangled. Avoid blood, and avoid fornication. If you do these 4 things, it will be good with you. That is the letter that is generated from the Jerusalem Council. That, I think, is one of the best examples of how to deal with conflict. A worse example might well be one of our favorite children's stories about Joshua at the Battle of Jericho. That as the people of Israel are moving towards Jericho, of course, they pass through 2 other kingdoms. And in one instance, they say, if you'll let us pass through on your road, we'll pay for your food, we'll pay for the water, and we'll keep to the road. And of course, the king of that land says, no way you're coming through. And so they kill every man, woman, and child and steal all the sheep and cows. They go to the next village, and God tells them to do exactly the same thing. And so they kill every man, woman, and child. Basically, in the scriptures, we have to deal with the fact that we have a, God-suggested genocide. At least that's what the scriptures seems to indicate. Although I do not believe that that is a genuine voice of God. Anytime God asks you to perform genocide, I think you should really consider whether or not that is the voice of God. I think, of course, it would not be. And of course, then they get to the Jericho. They march around the city 7 times. They shout, they blow their horns, the walls come down, and they kill every man, woman, child, including all of the animals in Jericho. That is one way to deal with conflict, to eradicate your opponent, to eradicate someone who's different from you, that is foreign from you, that is other. Between the two paradigms, if you will, between the walls of Jericho and the way that in Acts we have a description of the Jerusalem Council coming together to deal with a pretty serious problem, we have a choice to make. And I think it's going to be very important that we follow the fruitfulness method of listening to one another, sharing with one another, and making the determination based on the power of Spirit moving in and through us. And I hope that we will be able to open our eyes and see God's hand at work in the world around us. So I would invite you all for the next 3 Sundays, starting at 9:15 in Church of the Ascension in Ascension Hall, where on next Sunday we'll be talking about Hebrew Scriptures and the instances of same-sex in the Hebrew Scriptures, followed by the next week we'll talk about the same in the New Testament, primarily Paul and Romans. And finally, we will talk about and share with one another about where we are in this decision so that we might make a determination of how we move forward with the power of the Spirit. I hope that is helpful. I hope to see you at Formation for the next 3 Sundays. Thank you very much.